All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive. We're going deep into some fascinating geopolitical waters today. And trust me, you don't want to miss this.
No, you really don't.
Today, we're tackling the Panama Canal. But not just, as a feat of engineering. We're looking at it as a global power struggle.
Absolutely. This isn't just some ditch in the middle of Panama.
Exactly.
It's a major artery of global trade. 5% of the world's cargo.
Wow.
And a massive 70% of all U.S. cargo.
That's a huge chunk.
Wow.
So clearly it's a pretty important piece on the global chessboard.
Oh, absolutely. Strategically vital, you could say.
Okay, so to really dig into this, we're going back in time a little bit. Our main source material here is an episode of Taiwan Talks from 2025.
Okay.
Now, in this episode, international relations experts were breaking down some pretty, let's say, bold claims
Bold.
made by former President Trump.
Yes. Trump, always good for a headline, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely. And these claims, they touch on China, the Panama Canal, even Greenland. It's a pretty wild ride.
A real geopolitical puzzle.
And the experts in the episode, they really dig into some big questions. I mean, did China actually take control of the Panama Canal? Was Trump even right to be worried? Could the U.S. somehow wrestle back control? And what does any of this have to do with, like, Greenland?
So many questions, so little time.
Right. So let's start with Trump's statement because it's a doozy. He said, and I quote, "The Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China."
That definitely got people talking.
Oh, yeah. But, okay, let's be real here. Is it really that simple?
Well, not quite. I mean, it's important to separate the rhetoric from the reality.
Right.
The Panama Canal Authority, an independent Panamanian agency, they're the ones actually managing the canal.
So no Chinese flag flying over the canal.
Not exactly, no. But there is a Chinese presence.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Chinese companies do operate 2 of the canal's ports.
So not a complete takeover, but definitely a foothold.
Exactly.
The experts on Taiwan Talks, they mention companies like Hutchison Whampoa.
Right, that's a big one, a Hong Kong-based conglomerate.
And they run 2 major ports on the canal.
Yeah. And then there's the China Land Bridge Group. They're developing a massive port on Panama's Atlantic coast.
So strategically speaking, China's kind of collecting assets around the canal.
It seems that way. And it's not just ports either.
Really? What else?
Think bridges, new terminals, a convention center, even a power generation facility.
So they're getting involved in all sorts of projects, not just shipping.
Precisely. They're really expanding their footprint.
Okay, so you've got this growing Chinese presence around the canal. But how does the U.S. feel about all of this, especially considering their history with the canal?
Right. Well, the U.S. controlled the Panama Canal for decades, from its construction in the early 1900s all the way to 1979.
A pretty long time.
Yeah. And then a treaty returned control to Panama.
A controversial move for some, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. There's still a segment within the U.S., particularly within the Republican Party, that feels, like that was a mistake.
Like giving up a prized possession.
Something like that. So you have that historical baggage coupled with the anxiety of China's rise.
And that makes for a pretty potent mix.
It does. The U.S. is definitely looking at China's growing influence with a wary eye, especially when you consider what could happen in a conflict, say, involving Taiwan.
And just to add another layer to this whole thing, a Taiwanese company, Evergreen, they own a container terminal on the Atlantic side of the canal.
Right, Evergreen. It adds another level of complexity to this whole geopolitical situation.
So we've got this complex mix of economic interests, historical baggage, and strategic concerns.
Exactly. And the experts on Taiwan Talks highlighted some specific security risks, things like surveillance, espionage, and the potential for China to control critical infrastructure.
These aren't just hypothetical worries, are they? I mean, the canal's vital for global trade.
No, they're not. The canal is a major choke point. Whoever controls it or even influences its operation has a lot of leverage.
It's a reminder that geography and infrastructure still play a massive role in global power dynamics.
Absolutely. And it's something we tend to forget in this digital age.
So let's rewind the clock a bit. Back to 1977. President Carter signs those treaties, hands control of the canal back to Panama.
A different world back then.
Oh, completely. The rise of China wasn't even on the radar in the same way. The Cold War with the USSR was the big issue.
Right. Carter's goal, as the experts explained it, was to achieve peace in the region. Through negotiation, not military dominance.
It was bet on diplomacy.
It was. But knowing what we know now about China, Was it the right bet?
Tough question. It's easy to judge in hindsight, but Carter was dealing with a whole different set of challenges.
Absolutely. And it's a question that's still debated today.
Okay, so back to Trump and his comments about the canal. He said it was built for the U.S. military. Now, was he genuinely concerned about China, or was there something else going on?
Well, Trump was known for, let's say, his dramatic flair.
That's putting it mildly.
And the experts on Taiwan talks, they suggest these pronouncements were less about, factual accuracy and more about posturing.
So, classic Trump, stir the pot, create some drama, and then see what you can leverage.
You could say that.
Okay, so what could he have been hoping to get? Better deals for U.S. shipping companies, guaranteed access for the Navy.
Possibly. It's about using perceived threats to get a better position.
Classic power play. Okay, but hold on tight, because this is where things get really weird. In that same Taiwan Talks episode, Trump drops this bombshell about Greenland.
Greenland.
Yeah, Greenland. He said, and I quote, "We need Greenland for national security purposes. You look outside, you have Chinese ships all over the place, you have Russian ships all over the place."
That's quite a jump from the Panama Canal.
It is. But there's a logic to it, even if it seems a little out there.
Okay, I'm listening.
So Greenland, up in the Arctic Circle, it's strategically super important. It's close to crucial shipping routes. Plus, it's got tons of untapped resources.
Resources that are becoming more accessible as the Arctic ice melts.
Exactly. And China, they've been stepping up their game in the Arctic, investing in icebreakers, building infrastructure. They even call themselves a near-Arctic power now.
And that's raising eyebrows in Washington.
Oh, yeah. Trump's not the only one worried about China and Russia muscling in on the Arctic.
And it's not just Greenland either.
What do you mean?
Well, Trump also made comments about Canada, even suggesting it could become, get this, the 51st U.S. state.
Wow. Okay, so he's looking at the whole Arctic region.
It seems that way. It's like he's playing this grand game of geopolitical chess, trying to secure U.S. interests in all these key spots.
But was he really serious about annexing Greenland?
Probably not. More likely, he was setting the stage for negotiations, just like with the Panama Canal.
Create a crisis, then swoop in with a solution that benefits you.
Something like that. The experts on Taiwan Talks even brought up this thing called the COFA concept.
COFA?
Yeah, it stands for Compact of Free Association. It's an agreement the U.S. has with some Pacific Island nations.
Okay, and what does that involve?
Well, basically, these nations keep their sovereignty, but the U.S. provides economic and military support.
In exchange for
certain rights, like military basing rights.
So imagine that with Greenland. U.S. gets bases, a foothold in the Arctic, maybe a share of those resources. Greenland gets economic and military backing.
Exactly. A win-win, at least from the U.S. perspective.
But would Greenland even go for it? And what about Denmark? They currently control Greenland.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Lots of moving pieces in this puzzle.
Okay.
Okay, we've covered the Panama Canal, Greenland, even Canada. Trump was definitely shaking things up.
He had a knack for that.
He did. But there's another twist to this whole story. And it might surprise you. Remember how we talked about the Panama Canal being vulnerable?
Yeah.
Well, there's another factor. Climate change.
Right. And in a weird way, it's actually been good for the Panama Canal Authority's bottom line.
Wait, really? How's that possible?
So in October 2024, they announced record revenue.
Record revenue. But didn't we talk about how there's been less traffic because of the drought?
Yeah, that's the strange part. Less traffic, more money.
So how did they pull that off?
Well, they got creative. They raised toll rates. And they started auctioning off priority passage slots.
So if you're a shipping company in a hurry, you can pay extra to jump the line.
Exactly. And it's working.
But how does the drought fit into all of this?
The canal needs fresh water for its locks. You know, that system that raises and lowers ships as they go through.
Right.
But the drought in 2023 caused water levels to drop, so they had to restrict the size and number of ships.
So less water means less traffic.
Right. And to make up for the lost revenue, they raised those tolls and started the priority auctions.
Clever. But it also shows how crucial the canal is, even with these climate challenges.
Absolutely. And it adds another layer of complexity to everything. You've got this geopolitical tug of war between the U.S. and China, and now you throw in climate change.
It's like a recipe for unpredictability.
You could say that.
All right, so we've got a lot to unpack here. We've talked about China's moves, the U.S.'s anxiety, even Trump's wild card plays. But where do we go from here? How do the U.S. and China approach this whole game, and what are their strategies?
Well, for the U.S., it's this mix of historical entitlement and, frankly, anxiety.
Like they feel they should still be calling the shots.
Kind of, they see the canal as vital, almost like an extension of their own territory.
And any sign that they're losing influence, that freaks them out.
It does, and that anxiety, it fuels this desire to reassert control.
Through diplomacy,
Yeah.
economics, or maybe even,
Force.
yeah.
Well, Trump certainly hinted at that,
Mhm.
but it's a risky move.
Because it could backfire.
Exactly. Alienating Panama could push them closer to China.
So it's a delicate balancing act for the U.S.
It is. Now, China, they're playing a different game. More subtle, more long-term.
Not looking for a quick win.
No, they're cultivating relationships, investing strategically, steadily expanding their influence.
It's like they're playing Go while the U.S. is playing checkers.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. China's strategy is multi-layered.
How so?
Well, they invest in infrastructure, which creates economic dependencies.
Makes sense.
They build political ties, strengthening diplomatic relationships, and they project soft power, positioning themselves as a helpful partner.
It's a clever approach. A much more subtle approach than Trump's bombshell style.
Definitely. Less about shock and awe, more about steady, persistent pressure.
So how does this all play out? I mean, what are the possible scenarios for the Panama Canal as this rivalry heats up?
It's tough to predict with certainty, but there are a few possibilities. One is that this competition just keeps escalating.
Like a geopolitical arms race, but for influence.
Exactly. Both sides constantly trying to outmaneuver each other, potentially leading to more tension, maybe even proxy conflicts.
Not a very comforting thought.
No, not really. But there are more optimistic possibilities, too.
Like what?
Well, maybe the U.S. and China could reach some kind of agreement. Maybe shared governance or a system of guarantees.
So everyone feels like their interests are protected.
Exactly. But, considering how tense things are between the U.S. and China right now, that seems unlikely.
Yeah, finding common ground on something this important, it's a tough ask.
It is. But there's another scenario, although maybe less likely.
All ears.
What if Panama just says, nope, we're doing our own thing?
Like asserting their independence.
Exactly. Resisting pressure from both sides, forging their own path. But that would take some serious diplomatic skills.
And a commitment to staying neutral.
Absolutely. But it would be a pretty powerful statement.
Panama as the Switzerland of Central America. I kind of like it.
It would definitely shake things up.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about strategy, about power dynamics. But what about the economics of all this? Who wins, who loses in this whole Panama Canal game?
Well, the economic impact of the canal is huge. For the U.S., it's a key link in their supply chains.
So a lot of their imports and exports go through the canal.
A significant portion, yeah. And that makes the canal crucial for their economy.
So any disruption, whether it's political maneuvering, climate change, anything, that could really hurt the U.S.
It could. And for China, the canal is a crucial route for their trade with Latin America and the eastern U.S.
And they've invested heavily in the canal's infrastructure, right?
They have, so they definitely want to see it running smoothly.
It's in their best interest to keep things stable.
Exactly. But let's not forget about Panama.
Right, they're not just bystanders in all of this.
No, they're not. They're using the canal to boost their own economy.
How so?
Well, the canal brings in billions of dollars in revenue every year. They're attracting foreign investment. They're positioning themselves as a regional hub for trade and logistics.
Pretty smart strategy.
Yeah,
They're turning their geography into a major asset.
they are. But it also makes them a target for pressure from both the U.S. and China.
They're walking a tightrope, trying to keep everyone happy.
You could say that. It's a high-stakes game, that's for sure.
Billions of dollars, global trade flows, all hanging in the balance. And then, of course, you've got the environmental dimension.
Right.
We've talked about how climate change is already affecting the canal. And those impacts, they're only going to get worse.
That's the reality. Drought, rising sea levels, extreme weather, it all poses a threat to the canal's future.
And those environmental challenges, they're all tangled up with the geopolitical and economic ones.
Exactly. It creates this incredibly complex web of risks and opportunities.
It's like a three-dimensional chess game where the stakes just keep getting higher.
A very apt analogy.
But amidst all of this, I think it's important to remember the human side of things.
Absolutely.
What about the people of Panama? How are their lives affected by this whole tug of war between global powers?
That's a crucial question. For a lot of Panamanians, the canal is a source of pride.
It's a symbol of their country's importance.
It is, and it provides jobs, boosts the local economy, but it also brings challenges.
Like what?
Well, there's the risk of environmental damage, the potential for social disruption, and of course the constant pressure of being caught in the middle of this rivalry between the U.S. and China.
It's a complex reality for them.
It is. The canal brings both prosperity and vulnerability.
And for everyday Panamanians, navigating all of this, it takes resilience, adaptability, and a deep understanding of what's at stake.
They're living with the consequences of these global forces.
Their voices often get lost in the grand narratives about geopolitics and economics.
They do. But understanding their experiences, their hopes and fears, it's crucial to grasping the full picture.
Well said. So, as we start to wrap up this deep dive into the Panama Canal, I want to shift our focus to the future. What are the big trends, the key developments that we should be watching for in the years to come? What's next for this vital waterway and for the countries that rely on it?
Well, there are a few key trends to keep an eye on. First, the U.S.-China rivalry. It's probably going to intensify.
So more maneuvering, more pressure on Panama, maybe even more saber-rattling from both sides?
I think that's a safe bet.
Right.
Second, climate change. Its impact on the canal is only going to get more pronounced.
We've already seen how disruptive droughts can be.
And those disruptions, they'll likely become more frequent and more severe as climate change gets worse.
So Panama's going to have to adapt, and fast.
They will, which means coming up with new water management strategies, upgrading infrastructure.
A race against time as they try to deal with climate change while also navigating these geopolitical pressures.
Exactly. And then there's another trend to watch, the rise of new technologies.
And shipping.
Yeah, things like autonomous ships, artificial intelligence, blockchain, they're all set to transform global trade.
So the canal itself needs to adapt to stay competitive.
It does. And that means investing in technology, training workers, updating regulations.
It's a lot to handle. Geopolitical rivalries, climate change, technological disruption.
The Panama Canal is facing a confluence of challenges.
Challenges unlike any it's seen before.
And how Panama handles these challenges, that's going to have a huge impact, not just for them, but for the global economy and the balance of power in the 21st century.
It's a reminder that even a place that seems far away, like the Panama Canal, can be at the heart of global events.
It's a marvel of engineering, a linchpin of global trade, and now a focal point for great power competition.
It's a story that's still being written.
And how it unfolds, well, that's going to shape the future of globalization, international relations, the balance between human ambition and environmental sustainability.
A lot to think about. But we've got to leave you with something to chew on.
A cliffhanger.
You could say that. So here's our final thought-provoking question.
All right, lay it on me.
With the Arctic becoming increasingly important, how will the competition for strategic spots like Greenland play out? And what role will the Panama Canal play in this new world order?
Big questions, for sure. But before we get too lost in the global picture, let's bring it back to you, the listener.
Right, because this isn't just some abstract geopolitical game. It has real-world implications.
Exactly. Understanding these dynamics, it's about understanding the forces that shape your life. The stuff you buy, the prices you pay, even the security landscape you live in.
So let's connect those dots. Remember how we talked about 5% of global cargo going through the Panama Canal every year? That's a lot of stuff.
It is. Think about the things you buy, clothes, electronics, food, whatever. Chances are a good chunk of that stuff passed through the Panama Canal.
It's easy to forget how connected we are to these global systems.
It is. And for those of you in the U.S., that connection is even more direct. 70% of all U.S. cargo goes through the canal.
That's huge.
It is. So any disruption to the canal, that could have a real impact on the availability and cost of goods for American consumers.
It's a reminder that these geopolitical maneuvers, they're not just happening in some far-off place. They have consequences for all of us.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about Panama. They're not just sitting back and letting the U.S. and China call the shots.
Right, they're playing their own game.
Exactly. They're using the canal to strengthen their economy, to position themselves as a regional hub.
Raising those tolls, auctioning off those priority slots, attracting foreign investment.
They're making smart moves. But it's a tough balancing act, trying to navigate the demands of both the U.S. and China.
And then, of course, you've got climate change thrown into the mix.
Right. We talked about how droughts can disrupt the canal's operations.
And as climate change gets worse, those disruptions are only going to become more frequent and severe.
Which means potentially higher costs, more uncertainty for businesses and consumers who rely on the canal.
It's a sobering thought. Climate change isn't just an environmental issue. It's an economic and geopolitical one, too.
Exactly. So what can you do about all of this? Well, for starters, stay informed.
Pay attention to the news. Follow what's happening in Panama.
Right. And think about the global implications of events, even if they seem far away.
Because those events, they can have ripple effects that reach you no matter where you live.
Exactly. And be conscious of the choices you make as a consumer. Where are your goods coming from? How are they transported?
Understanding these systems, it allows you to make more informed decisions.
It's all about connecting the dots, seeing how geopolitics, economics, climate change, even your own shopping cart, they're all interconnected.
Well said. So to sum up, the Panama Canal, it's far more than just a waterway. It's a stage for global power plays, it's vital for trade, and it's a microcosm of the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century.
It's a story that's still unfolding.
And how it plays out, that's going to shape the future of globalization, international relations, the balance between human ambition and environmental sustainability.
Big stuff.
Big stuff indeed. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the Panama Canal and its global significance. Remember, knowledge is power.
Stay curious, stay engaged.
And we'll be back soon with more deep dives into topics that matter. Until then, don't forget to like and subscribe to our show. And it's not just for, the academics and the experts. Understanding all of this, it's about understanding the world around you.
Yeah, it's about connecting the dots
Exactly.
between the global forces and your everyday life.
The things you buy, the prices you pay, even your sense of security.
It's all
So let's bring it back to that 5% of global cargo figure.
right. 5% of everything that gets shipped around the world, it goes through the Panama Canal.
And think about all the stuff you buy, right? Clothes, electronics, food.
Chances are a good chunk of that stuff, it made its way through that canal.
We rely on these global systems more than we realize.
We do. And for those of you in the U.S., that reliance is even more direct. 70% of U.S. cargo, it uses the Panama Canal.
70%? That's massive.
It is. So any disruption to the canal, that could have a real impact on what's available in stores and how much things cost.
It all comes back to the Panama Canal.
In a way, it does. And remember, Panama, they're not just sitting back and letting the U.S. and China dictate everything.
They're playing their own game.
Exactly. They're using the canal to strengthen their own economy, to become a regional powerhouse.
Raising tolls, auctioning off those priority slots, attracting foreign investment.
Smart moves, but it's a delicate balancing act.
Trying to please two superpowers while also looking out for your own interests.
Exactly. And then you've got that wild card. Climate change.
Right, the droughts, the rising sea levels.
It's already disrupting the canal, and it's only going to get worse.
Which means more uncertainty, more potential for things to go wrong.
And that could mean higher prices, shortages.
Climate change, it's not just an environmental issue anymore. It's economic, it's geopolitical.
It's all intertwined.
So what can we do? I mean, as individuals, does any of this even matter to us?
It does. For starters, stay informed. Pay attention to what's happening in the world.
Follow the news, read up on these issues.
Right, and think critically about what you read. Connect the dots between events, even if they seem far away.
Because everything's connected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And be a conscious consumer. Think about where your stuff comes from, how it got to you.
Those choices we make, they matter.
They do. It's all about understanding these systems, making informed decisions.
So to wrap this all up, the Panama Canal, it's more than just a waterway.
It's a symbol of global interconnectedness.
It's a stage for power struggles, a vital economic artery.
And a reminder that even seemingly distant events can have a real impact on our lives.
And for those of you studying for the UPSC exams, well, this is all pretty relevant stuff.
Absolutely. Global dynamics, international relations, economics, environmental issues.
It's all there, playing out in the story of the Panama Canal.
And it's a story that's still unfolding.
So stay curious, stay informed.
And keep those brains buzzing.
We'll be back soon with more deep dives into fascinating topics. Until then, don't forget to like and subscribe.
And thanks for listening.